Hello, Mr. Ryan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lucas.
Welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we do post every week, so hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing adventures into the rare and wonderful world of horticulture.
Exactly.
Now, Stephen, what do I see before me?
Well, we have hit the creme de la creme of ponds. We've hit the largest of my bodies of water in the garden at home. And I have to say, this one, we actually bought land to create this pond.
So now there's commitment to landscaping.
Yes, exactly. We had wanted a large pond, which we got, but we didn't have the space to put it into our garden.
Yep.
And we actually acquired a piece of old unused road reserve from the local council, specifically to put this large body of water into place.
Now, a question then, why was it so important for you to have thus such a large body of water?
Well, I suppose there's several reasons for that.
Yes.
Of course, you know, a big body of water in any garden becomes a major feature. Mm-hmm. I also wanted it for the extra water in case of requirements for fire or drought or whatever else might be an issue.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just love gardening around water, so can't have too much.
No, that does look beautiful and it looks very natural. Now, you and Craig did shoot footage of this while we were in lockdown, which we are not anymore, but Thank you, Craig, for your great camera work. So we'll have a look at that footage now, and then I have got some questions for you.
Uh-huh. And now for the pièce de résistance of ponds in my garden. This is our largest pond, so let's go and have a look. This is the biggest of our ponds, goodbye duck, and it has slightly different uses to the pond in the front. It's still very deep, so it makes it a very good water source in case of fires, but it's clay lined instead of having a bituminous liner in it, so the water level is inclined to go up and down all over the place. And it's the biggest of the ponds that we could fit on this site. Remember, when you are digging a hole to put in a pond, the hole's going to look huge, but by the time you fill it with water and you also surround it with plant life, then the surface area of water you're going to see will be substantially smaller. So always dig a pond bigger than you think you're going to need. Now, this one has no fish in it at all, so it's a frog habitat pond. And I've got different levels within it, and there's also a sort of swamp area at the top end, and we have a boardwalk over that. This pond is around about 2 meters deep, so it's quite a volume of water. So it may not be obvious that you could use one in a really small garden, but if you've got a garden of some size, this pond sits nicely into the environment. Now, this body of water is right at the top of our garden, and normally I suggest to people that you put bodies of water in the lowest lying area in the garden. They tend to look more natural. What I've done to try and tie this into the garden is, in fact, where the bank is behind the pond, which is of course built out of the spoil that came out of the bottom of the pond, I've planted that up really densely with quite large and dominant shrubs, and it makes a good thick screen around the pond. And it tends to pull the body of water into an area that feels flatter by having that big tall shrubbery behind. This little jetty makes a lovely feature around the pond. It's a fabulous place to come and sit and listen to the frogs, and it has a practical purpose as well. It's a very good way of getting in and out of the water if I need to, so that I can clean out sticks or any other debris that falls in without disturbing all the flora and fauna around the edges. Some of the plants I've used around our biggest pond aren't sort of classically sort of water edge plants, but they give wonderful texture and form and an almost tropical feel. The plant I'm standing right next to is an Australian tree grass, Xanthorrhoea. And the Xanthorrhoeas are fabulous plants. They almost look like those old-fashioned lamps we had back in the 1960s. It's a beautiful plant, very expensive to buy, and make sure if you do buy one that you get one that's been well settled in its pot, and you're very careful planting it out so you don't disturb its roots. And don't plant it into rich, loamy soil. It likes a poor, gravelly soil. Beautiful plant, and this one's been here for some years now. The other plant I've used to great effect, I think, is my palm tree, which is one of the colder hardy palms, Butia odorata, and it has wonderful big long grey fronds. Still a fairly young tree, but it's getting up in size. Also, I've used the rice paper plant, Tetrapax papyrifera, and it's a fabulous big leafy sort of bold tropical-esque looking plant. And finally, a plant that's going to have a profile all on its own, I promise, in the very near future, is the giant Chilean rhubarb, Gunnera tinctoria.
how gorgeous was that? It's such a beautiful sunny day. But so my first question, we did a film about your smaller pond, which was lined with a rubber membrane, which we'll link up here. So this one is lined with nothing. It's lined with clay. Now, so tell me about the lining of this pond.
All right. Well, this pond, in an Australian context, could well be considered a dam.
Aha.
And so we dug a very large hole, as big as we could manage. We actually went right down to a rock bottom, quite literally.
We've all been there, Stephen.
Yes. The one good thing I can say about the lack of good topsoil on this block when I took over was the fact that the clay holds water rather well. So we didn't need to put a liner in, nor did we want to, because it was going to be extremely expensive, because it's a very large area that we've covered, and so in fact we just left the clay, and it holds water pretty well, and we can top it up if we need to, but it holds a reasonable level even during the summer months.
Wow, that's amazing. So for the home pond maker, it would totally depend though upon the natural soil conditions that you've got.
Yeah, you can in fact, in less clayey soils than mine, get a particular type of clay that you can use to line a pond.
You line it, so it's like pottery making.
Almost, yes. So you can go that way, but we didn't need to, because our soil was just so incredibly clayey as it was.
Interesting. And Stephen, the other thing, which is just over your shoulder,
the
jetty. Now, every time I've seen that, I thought, oh, how picturesque, but
a bit of an affectation, perhaps. Yes.
But in your video, I saw how it's essentially a ladder to get in and out of the pond when you have to clean it or maintain it.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, if I had to scramble down the side, I'd probably end up with a whole pile of mud in the water, because it is just a clay-lined pond.
Yeah.
I'd possibly dislodge half of my plants as well.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't enter the water with any sense of grace whatsoever.
But you can ascend and descend from your jetty.
Yeah, and so it has its practical use, apart from the fact you can sit on the end of it with a glass of whiskey and listen to the frogs.
And which we can hear doing their work now. Well, amazing. So I need to apologise for thinking bad thoughts about your jetty.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So the other thing that you mentioned in the video was disguising this part. So that whole notion of the levels of your block. So if your block is sloping, that to put a water feature at the top is counterintuitive, it's going to look stupid.
Yeah.
So yours is actually on the highest point of your property, and you have created an optical illusion. So I think we might go around the back just to see exactly what you did do, because from here, as you say in that footage, it looks completely natural and at home.
Yes, it does, but it has got quite a large bank behind it, and we had to manage that. So that's in fact what we've done.
Well, we're going to have a sneaky look around the back. Well, we are Indiana Jonesing now behind your bank, and we are actually under the shade of the Brugmansia tree, which we did a video about, which we will link above. And I just wanted to probe the back bank a little bit more, because what were some of the things that you thought about planting so that from that side of the pond it looked seamless and you weren't really aware of that drop of land?
The trick basically, Matthew, is to in fact plant it up densely enough with bushy enough things that are tall enough, even if they're down the bank a little bit, to still give that sense of, sort of rising height behind the pond. Because if you've got the rising height there, your eye catches that, you don't realise that the land actually drops away behind it. Right. So you've got to get that sense that it's sort of the mountain is sort of raising up on the other side.
So in terms of the planting then, so on that side, which is kind of the highest point of the land, you've actually got the lowest plants, and then they get higher as we come around to the back, and you want to create that optical illusion.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've tried to do, and I think it sort of works.
Oh, it really has, because on that side you have no sense of the land drops, and it just looks like a forest continuing.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the big trick when you're placing a pond into a sloping site, that it has that sense of belonging.
Sightlines, Stephen, sightlines.
Yes, and all that stuff, yes.
All right, let's hack our way out of the undergrowth.
What a good idea.
Now, Stephen, the other thing I wanted to talk about, which you mentioned in the film, was this grass tree, which, what's the botanic name?
Xanthorrhoea. It's the plant you have to have in your garden if you're planting an alphabet garden, because there's not many things starting with an X.
Xanthorrhoea. What else starts with an X?
Xeronema. Look, you can't trick me like that.
What's a Xeronema?
Xeronema comes from New Caledonia in New Zealand, and they are a red flowering lily relative. They're beautiful.
Sounds lovely. Now, the grass tree. You've alluded to this to me in the past, and you mentioned it in the film about the things you need to bear in mind when you're buying these. So I just wanted to tease that thought out a little bit more, because you do see them for sale a lot. Yep. They're not inexpensive.
They are very expensive.
And I think they might even be available in Britain, like tree ferns.
Yep.
So let me just ask you to now tell our viewers what you told me about the things you need to bear in mind about buying one of these.
All right. The trouble with them is that they don't like to be disturbed.
Yep.
But they are generally dug from the wild, because it would take 80 or 100 years to get a trunk tall enough to have a plant like this. So if you're raising them from seed, you're going to be a very old person by the time you get something like this. So you've basically got to buy it that way.
We're young enough, Stephen, to grow them.
All right, well, let's start a batch of seed tomorrow, shall we? So you'll be buying something that's been taken from the wild.
Yeah.
Like the tree ferns, they're protected plants, so they can only be dug from the wild in areas where there's been road renovations or things like that, where they'd be destroyed anyway.
Yeah.
So they normally come with a tag to say that they've been taken legally from the wild. Mm-hmm. When they're potted up, they generally pot them up into a big black plastic bag or pot with the existing soil that they came out of, which is normally a fairly impoverished sort of clay, pebbly sort of soil.
Because my childhood was in Perth in Western Australia, and there is it the same species?
Different species in Western Australia, but same requirements.
Principle, very, very harsh conditions that grows in.
Oh yes, so they don't like a rich soil at all. So I actually planted this out of its pot into my clay. Mm-hmm. There was no soil preparation done whatsoever. I dug a hole. It was in a big black plastic bag. I slit the bottom out of the bag, gently slid it into the hole, held my breath, hoping that the whole thing wasn't going to crumble. Yeah. Because you've got to fool them that they haven't been moved.
Yes, you don't want to disturb the root ball.
No. And that's the thing, when you buy one, you need to get it from a grower that can basically guarantee to you that it has been in that pot for at least 18 months to 2 years. Because when they're dug out of the ground, if they're not handled properly, they're already dead, but they can live on the sap that's in the trunk for 12 to 18 months or more. So you need to know you bought one that has been well settled in its current container.
And that's actually alive.
That is actually alive, because they can look alive, and in fact they're on their way out. And
zombie grass trees.
Well, they are. And you'll blame yourself, because it takes so long for one to die after you've bought it, that you'll assume you've done something wrong. And it could well be the fact that, well, you did do something wrong. You didn't check to get one that was well settled in its pot.
Okay, so how can you do that? On the tags, does it have the date that it was removed?
No, it doesn't normally have the dates on the tags. And even if it did, that doesn't help you as to when it was potted and how long it was potted necessarily.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think there's a bit of shonky stuff goes on with some of the labels. They just whack labels on things as they're going, and I don't think that they're like a use by date.
Yeah.
You just need to get it from a responsible and credible nursery person that knows that those plants have been in those containers for a fair while. Because the trick is to get it out without disturbing its roots.
Wow.
Basically.
Who would have thought that there was so much complexity around them? Now, a sub question. This is a really ancient type of plant. Is it related to a cycad? No,
they're actually related. They're in the, well, I'm not quite sure what family they're in now, because they keep splitting the families up. I'd have to check. But they were for a long time in Liliaceae with all the lily type plants.
Really?
Yeah, so I'd have to check. They're probably in Xanthorrhoeaceae by now, I should think, because the families are getting, it would seem, rather much smaller as we go along.
Because I've seen them again in WA. They have enormous spires of cream off-white flowers.
Yeah, this one has flowered for me. I've had 2 flowers on it over the years, and when they flower, they tend to branch. So this will now have 2 crowns in it. It's actually developed in 2 crowns, but it's not terribly obvious yet.
How fantastic.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful plant. It's now been in there 8 to 10 years. It has grown, it's flowered, it's settled. I feel quite confident it will be there forever.
It's alive. It's not a zombie grass tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Mr. Ryan, how beautiful. I'm so glad that we have now completed our epic 3-part, 4-part 5 part. I lose track.
Yeah.
Water feature.
Yes, we started from tiny wee little puddles of water up to something quite substantial.
Which is just stunning. And the one thing I forgot to mention, which is just over your shoulder there.
Yes.
The Gunnera.
Yes. Well, we're going to do a whole story on Gunnera. It's one of those plants that just is screaming out to be a star.
I'm screaming. I don't know. I live for Gunnera. It's an early childhood memory, but we'll go over that when we do our plant profile on Gunnera.
Yes.
What could we possibly trump this water feature epic with?
I don't know, but it'll probably be something plant-oriented, and I think we may have something that's gargantuan to talk about next time.
Gargantuan, because we all know that size matters. Well, Stephen, we do post every week, so hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing adventures.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.